Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Armor. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins with a man named James living alone in his house. James wakes up at 7 a.m. and goes straight to the fridge to get an orange juice box, which turns out to contain alcohol. Ironically, James is the leader of an anti-alcohol community in the church near his house. Every day, James holds meetings there to hear the stories of his members who are struggling to reduce alcohol in their lives. Meanwhile, it turned out that James was secretly carrying the drink in his tumbler, despite saying all the time that he was able to get off alcohol thanks to his son.
So the bottle does do us, right? I know it took me a long time to admit that. And my son.
Everyone in the community thought that James was the one who had successfully left his bad habits behind and was now living a happy life working with his only son.
It's me. Keep coming back.
Okay.
James now works as a courier with his son Casey at a security agency. Every day, Casey picks up his father at church and then travels to their office together.
It's a good thing.
Along the way, Casey tells him about his pregnant wife. He also asked why his father didn't want to attend the ceremony for his wife Sarah's pregnancy. Actually, Casey knows that his father is still grieving the loss of his wife, aka Casey's mother. That's why James had been addicted to alcohol for years. Even so, what Casey knows now is that his father has already recovered from the addiction.
Yeah? 6 years sober today, big guy. Huh? Come on.
Arriving at the office, they were assigned to deliver goods. As usual, James always checked every item that would be sent before leaving. This annoyed their boss, Frank, because it could cause the delivery to be late.
You really need to review all this stuff again.
Protocol, Frank.
And you're already late, as always.
After checking all the items, James and Casey moved them to the truck. However, suddenly, one of the boxes was so heavy that Casey couldn't lift it.
Okay. Fuck.
Casey was curious about the box's contents, but after all, they were just couriers who had no right to open or find out the box's contents. Moments later, they were off. However, just before that, James had seen a suspicious black car in front of his office. After completing all the deliveries, the couriers usually shower and change at the office before heading home. Then, Casey again invited his father to go to his house. Casey intended to comfort his father, who had been living alone. James thought for a moment before finally deciding to accept the offer.
Still stands, okay? Just come over whenever. Just thought it'd be a good idea for you to...
Case. You want me to bring a pie or?
That night, James went to Casey's house and was immediately greeted by Sarah. James said that he wanted to taste Sarah's cooking. After that, James told the story of Casey's childhood, which made Sarah feel very entertained. The atmosphere that night was very warm, and for a moment, James was able to forget his sadness after losing his wife a few years ago.
Of a 147-year-old woman.
Okay, calm down. She was probably in her 50s.
Cheers.
Meanwhile, elsewhere, a robber named Rook is seen. In this scene, Rook and his accomplices are seen preparing complete weaponry.
Careful with the C4.
I know it's unstable as fuck.
Yeah, well, everything's unstable.
Rook then received a call from someone who blamed him for being late.
Right. Let's do it.
As usual, James was at church the next day before Casey picked him up. After that, they went to the office and immediately checked all the items to be shipped. While checking, James found a difference in the number of items in the delivery note.
What? Why are there 4 cases? It only says 3 here. All the stuff. There are rules and protocols, Frank.
Unexpectedly, James's question actually made Frank angry, and at that moment, James felt that his boss was starting to go too far. James unconsciously kept that anger until the moment they left to deliver the goods. Casey was the first to notice and tried to calm his father down. However, this time, James was really angry. He regretted giving in to Frank's request because they were in a difficult position. Even though they were only couriers, they had to be responsible for the goods that were sent, even though they had no idea what the goods contained. Who knows if it's a form of money laundering or illegal goods delivery that could one day make them a scapegoat.
We laundered money, it could be unmarked bills, we could be fencing something. If it's not on the ledger, we don't take it. It's my fault.
Halfway through the journey, James realized their truck was being followed by a suspicious black van. James was immediately alert and tried to avoid the black van, which certainly surprised Casey. He immediately panicked and tried to contact their colleagues over the radio. Unfortunately, no one received the message because the location was deserted and no one received a signal.
Dispatch, this is Casey to dispatch. We are getting robbed on Lincoln Road, and we need backup. Do you hear me?
Hello. This is 432. This is Brody 247. We have... Hello.
James realized that help wouldn't be coming anytime soon. Therefore, he tried to drive his truck through a different route in the hope that the van would go away and disappear.
It's on the right.
This time, James's truck was heading towards a deserted bridge, and unexpectedly, the van was overtaken by his friend, who was now blocking James's movement. Now, James couldn't move anymore. He was completely surrounded by armed robbers led by Rook. James and Casey could only remain in their truck, even though the robbers kept shooting at them. After the truck was hit by a grenade, James and Casey immediately looked for a way to get out of the truck. As a father and former police officer, James tried to be calm, especially when facing Casey, who looked so panicked. James then asked Casey to be ready with his gun because, after that, they would face the robbers in a shootout.
On top, they're armed!
James and Casey's precision managed to make 2 robbers fall. However, James realized that they were unlikely to win the fight. The only thing he could do was hide. For that, James and Casey moved to the back of the truck, then locked the truck from the inside so that the robbers could not shoot at them anymore. After that, James looked for the medicine box in the truck, but it was not there. Inevitably, James could only tie a rope around Casey's leg to stop the blood flow from the gunshot wound. Now that Casey had calmed down, James wanted to call for help and wait for it to arrive. Unfortunately, James's mobile phone could not receive a signal, so he and Casey were trapped in the truck for a long time. James then realized that the men were professional robbers, unlikely to let them out alive. Meanwhile, outside the truck, Rook was confused because his mission was not going according to plan. Therefore, he tried to negotiate. Unexpectedly, he learned the identities of James and Casey. Rook, who realized that Casey was shot, offered to take Casey to the hospital as long as James and Casey got out of the truck. However, as a former policeman, James knew it was just a trick by the robbers to snatch valuables from the truck.
Anybody home? You're old enough to know what Murphy's Law is, right, James?
You know my name.
You can call me Rook. Don't waste time. Come out now. Come out now, and we'll get you to a hospital. You got my word.
And if you could blow these doors open, you wouldn't be here negotiating with me.
He also knew the robbers would never let a witness to their crime live.
Bad choice.
On the other hand, Casey realized that their delivery this morning was more than usual. James also remembered the discrepancy between the number of items and the note given by Frank. With that, James immediately opened several shipping boxes in the truck. As it turned out, the boxes contained millions of dollars worth of money and gold. Inside one of the boxes were many gold coins with sun signs. According to James's memory, the sun symbol is related to a drug cartel from Mexico.
It's cartel.
We then return to Rook and his men, who are still trying to get James and Casey out of the truck. This time, they threw tear gas, hoping James and Casey would run out of air in the truck. As soon as the tear gas filled the air, James and Casey felt asphyxiated. But then again, there was no way they could get out of the box truck.
Use the cases, use the phone with the case.
Fortunately, Casey could think fast. He had an idea to use a sponge, which was used as a safety measure inside the shipping box, to cover the holes in the truck box to prevent the tear gas fumes from entering the truck. After throwing the tear gas, Rook and his men waited for a while. However, the truck door was still firmly closed. Rook thought that James and Casey were dead inside. However, as Rook got closer, James said that he already knew that the robber's target was the millions of dollars of gold inside the truck.
Son of a bitch.
You touch a coin in that fucking case, and I promise you and your kid are gonna go down real hard.
Rook was increasingly confused by the amount of information James knew. Inevitably, Rook had to complete this mission immediately. He ordered his men to break the truck's door using a drill. Meanwhile, the weather in the area is very hot until one of Rook's men, Miller, becomes angry because this truck business is completely unexpected.
Now how much longer? Crack that truck open soon, I'm gonna crack you open.
On the one hand, James and Casey really didn't know what to do. Casey should get treatment before the gunshot wound on his leg gets infected. James also thought that at least the truck was equipped with alcohol. That made James remember his tumbler. At first, Casey thought that his father was just remembering his past as an alcoholic. However, James was eventually forced to reveal that he had been drinking alcohol all along. James's confession left Casey stunned.
I got a thermos full of vodka.
Dad, you've been drinking again.
I never really stopped.
After a moment, Casey immediately blamed his father. All this time, Casey thought that his father was only mourning the death of his mother. However, seeing James not wanting to hear his words, Casey knew that his father's stubbornness would never heal. In fact, it was because of this trait that finally took the life of Casey's mother. The scene switches to the past when James takes his wife and son camping, but James uses a police car to go on holiday with his family. That night, the road was dark because there were no lights, and suddenly, they were overtaken by a speeding car.
Maniac.
At that very moment, James, who was supposed to be off work, immediately thought he should do his duty as a policeman, which was to warn the driver not to speed. James's wife also reminded him that it shouldn't be necessary. However, James insisted because he worried the driver would cause an accident. Confidently, James approached the driver of the car.
You don't look like a cop?
You're going 100 and a 50, you aware of that?
Yes, sir. It won't happen again.
Yeah? Slow down.
Yes, sir.
After finishing his business, James thought that he would soon be able to have a peaceful holiday. However, suddenly, an accident happened. James was unconscious at the time until an ambulance and the police arrived to help his family. Casey, who was in the back seat, was seriously injured, but fortunately, he survived. Unfortunately, James's wife, who was in the front seat and still holding James's hand, could not be saved. The past made James regret it until Casey finally felt compassion and asked James to forgive himself.
And you need to stop punishing yourself for something that you had no control over.
Shortly after, James checked his water bottle at the front of the truck. James then looked for a way to retrieve the bottle by making a hook. Fortunately, James managed to do it quickly. He immediately poured the alcohol right over Casey's gunshot wound. After a while, James thought of making the robbers leave by turning the alcohol into a low-level bomb. Also, James kept an electric shock device that he could use as a weapon. Shortly after, Casey called Rook and confessed that he was giving up. Casey said that he would come out as long as Rook would take him to the hospital, as promised. Initially, Rook wanted to believe Casey and asked his men to stop the drill. However, Miller makes Rook realize that Casey only pretends to make Rook feel sorry for him. What Miller said was true because James was outside the truck and waiting for the right moment to throw the bomb. On the other hand, Casey continued to distract the robbers to get closer to the truck door.
3 seconds to open up the door. 1, 2.
The robbers, who did not expect James's presence, were immediately ready with their weapons. So did James, who had anticipated the attack. Unfortunately, one of the robbers, named Adam, managed to shoot James. Fortunately, James was able to get back into the truck in time. This made Adam very upset and threatened to finish off Casey.
Open the fucking hatch!
Meanwhile, Miller, who was hit by an electric shock, immediately complained to Rook to complete this mission. He thought of rolling the truck under the bridge to end things quickly. However, Adam opposed the idea because if the truck was dropped into the water, they would have to look for gold bars that would most likely sink to the bottom of the river. The debate was getting heated. In the end, Miller did something unexpected. Apparently, Miller was really impatient, and with his emotions running high, he pushed the truck with his black van. Once the truck arrived at the edge of the bridge, he immediately blew it up. James and Casey, who were still in the truck, rushed to escape. Unfortunately, the river water entered the truck with great force. Meanwhile, Casey's feet were still trapped among the items in the truck. When he realized that Casey was still trapped, James tried to save his son. He had to race against time because soon, the truck would sink to the bottom of the river. At this point, Casey started to give up. He told his father to leave him where he was, rather that both of them would not survive. However, since James had already lost his wife, he couldn't possibly leave Casey in that condition. Finally, with the strength of his father and the miracle of God, James managed to get Casey out of the truck. James then took Casey to the edge to rest. Unexpectedly, however, Miller approached and intended to finish James off. The fight between James and Miller ensued. The fight was actually quite tough until Miller saw the helpless Casey and immediately took his gun. But suddenly, Rook shot Miller and killed him on the spot. Rook, who had led his friends to attack James, now turned around to save James and his son. After that, James carried Casey to the edge of the highway to wait for help. Then, Rook suddenly arrives and congratulates James for surviving the truck tragedy. In fact, Rook saved Casey and James not for nothing. Rook already knew that he had lost, especially since the gold bars he was targeting had sunk to the bottom of the river. Rook also said that help from the police would be coming soon. To that end, Rook asks James and Casey to keep quiet about the matter and pretend they have never met.
I was never here.
All right, in that case.
Finally, to repay Rook's kindness, James and Casey agreed to the deal. Here comes the plot twist. After saying goodbye to James and Casey, Rook is picked up by a black car that turns out to be Frank. That is how Rook finds out who James and Casey are in the company.